Hi, I'm Michael Matthews. Today, we're going to be talking about how to make a character work that shouldn't work in the campaign they're in. So, I've been watching The Expanse, and I have fallen in love with that show because it's amazing. There's going to be some minor spoilers for The Expanse, not much. In particular, a tiny bit about Amos. I'm not going to talk much about what the TV has said about his past, but I will hint at some things. Even then, the TV show hasn't said a ton. I have not read the books, but I've seen a discussion or two that helps inform a little bit of what I've said. So, The Expanse is a show that is in space, and it is primarily the show itself is about a crew that is delving deeper and deeper into some of these mysteries that are surrounding what is going on between the Earth, Mars, and then the Belt factions. It is overall a lot of intrigues, character stuff. There is violence on occasion, but there is a character that doesn't belong in the show. If we want to make this like a role-playing game, Amos is the player who makes a character who doesn't fit with what's going on. He's the guy who dumped a ton into strength, endurance, and bought a bunch of combat skills, and took like either psychopath or lack of empathy as a disadvantage. He should be a nightmare, but he is my favorite character on the show. Now, he didn't start off that way. He grew until he got to the place that he was, but it felt like a player in a game he didn't belong in, trying to figure out how to make himself work. It's a lot like Wolverine. The character, they weren't sure what to do with him until suddenly they did. They gave him a pass. They had him read Japanese when no one knew he could. His answer helped define the character. When he was asked, "Well, you read Japanese?" He's like, "Yeah." "I didn't know that." "You never asked." The "you never asked" means this is someone's very closely guarded, who keeps all these things that have happened to himself. He's had some sort of background in Japan. These started to make him more interesting than the berserker he started off as, because as a character, he just wasn't working. Now, note, I'm mostly remembering this stuff from things I knew a very long time ago. I might be a little bit off, but I did double-check the panels on which those things happened. But really, Chris Claremont, when he did the Wolverine miniseries, really tapped into the thing that we love about Wolverine. While Wolverine, who should in many ways be one of the least powerful of the X-Men, is the most popular character. So, Amos in The Expanse seems to take a little bit of time to find his niche. He can be the silent guy in the background, but he doesn't often have much to do, which, as a player, is kind of boring. It's when they play into the psychopath part of who he is. Now, in a role-playing game, I'm going to play like the scientist he talks to, who's had something done to his brain, feels like it's part of the way the GM and the player found a way to connect to his character. There's a scientist they meet, something's happened to his head, and that's the first time we have a moment that clicks into who Amos is. He's asking if it's reversible, and suddenly this thing where he's always seemed emotionally a bit stunted and a bit separated from everybody else has a reason. We start to get some insight in him. Suddenly, he's a character who's been altered. He's had something taken away from him, the ability to empathize. His past becomes more tragic, and we have someone who's trying to understand how to be a good person, but doesn't have a moral compass in himself. Now that we know it was something done to him, and not just the trauma of a difficult life which he had growing up, he's someone who's aware that this is not how he is. And he's trying to find his way out. He's the psychopath who's trying not to be. And I think that's one of the things that makes him great. He's not the player being disruptive. He's the player who's trying to curve their character's disruptive behavior by having them give over their morality to somebody else, and it's brilliant. You have the person who wants to rush in and fight, who wants to, pull the guns or kill someone like that, because players are real casual about NPC deaths sometimes. And the rest of the players aren't playing that game. So he decides, wait, what if I have someone who is like that, who's like that disruptive player, but is trying not to be, but can't? So it lets the character understand the world through their relationships with the other players. Suddenly those relationships become super important. It gives him something to do in the quiet times. It also gives him a reason to have that hard line, "I will protect you even if you make it difficult" attitude, without demolishing the game that doesn't really play that way. Amos is awesome. And he didn't start that way, but they found it. Now, The GM occasionally would throw some situations his way where violence would be easier, but he knows he shouldn't. So he gets put in interesting places where he's not fighting, or he's stopping a fight. And intellectually he knows he shouldn't fight, but wouldn't it be easier just to vent this asshole? And yeah, probably. But the people he's attached to himself, their moral compass won't let him. So Amos is there to fix the problems that come up because basically they made a decision that became problematic. So the player now has a role in the rest of the game when he was just trying to be the hack and slash player who showed up in a social game. I adore this character. It's very easy to make a character that doesn't fit the campaign, and it's not always that player's fault. Sometimes it's just bad communication. You have different ideas than the rest of the group as to what you're creating. Now, certain types of session zeros will help this, but you're not in other people's heads. You're not necessarily going to know exactly what they were thinking when they came up with the characters. Sometimes you thought this person to be useful. It just turns out that what you're doing, they don't have a lot to do. So instead of like throwing out the concept, which sometimes is the right answer, Amos is an example of how to take your original concept and grow it to meet what's going on with the rest of the party, to make it so it fits the game that you're playing in. And this is best if it happens by talking to the GM and players. Figure out a way that this person would be in this group. What brings them in? What is their tie? And it may require you to expand a bit. Amos begins very tightly tied in with Naomi, and eventually kind of transfers that to Holden, who's the captain. They start off at odds. It seems like, oh, this is the guy that's going to fight Holden, and they find out very quickly that's not interesting for long. So they develop the character, so they play with him. He eventually sees this is the kind of person I am allowed to follow. So if what you're doing isn't working, try something else. Explore it a little bit. Talk about it. Don't try to make it happen without a discussion, because it helps if everyone's on the same page. You want to make room to find out where you fit in. So if you do this isn't going to be easy. There's no one-size-fits-all. This is a case-by-case basis, and it doesn't always work. The first season of The West Wing had a character who just didn't feel like she was in the same movie, or the same show. The whole time, this person was not kind of talking at the same rate as everybody else, wasn't at the same tone. They even had her outside of the main group for a big part of it, and they never found a way to make it work. Mandy was just a character in a different show. And maybe, as a character, she was fine. It's just, they eventually decided this isn't working. And here's the thing. That's absolutely fine. Sometimes a character is just not going to work. But Amos is the character that they worked and built until they had something that fit with the rest of the show. And that's what makes him a good example in this case. He doesn't feel like he's going to be in the middle of everything, but occasionally he's given someone to fight or kill, and even given sometimes to be the moral compass for somebody else using what he's learned. The GM is throwing things to him that let him be that person, but also let him test against not being that person. And some players are kind of okay with not being the central hero running around doing everything. If you have a player who created this character who doesn't want the spotlight in that way and to the degree that maybe someone else does, then this becomes possibly a bit easier. We learn how he sees the world. Some people are bad, some people are who you follow, and some people are who you protect. When that was enunciated by the character on screen, when he articulated, here's how he sees the world, we now have a way of plugging him into everything else that goes on. You follow Holden. You protect people like Alex, the ship's captain. You think Prex, there's a guy who comes on who they're trying to help find his daughter. You protect them because they're not people like you. And you get to show off being the kind of person that your character is. So, finding that thing that lets you understand the character, which can sometimes be a problem, and lets you find a way to fit it into the game is worth it. But you and the GM and the other players should have a talk about it. If the character's not working, talk. Figure it out. Bounce around ideas. Try some things. Because I know that the Expanse started off as books, but I'm looking at it as if it were a role-playing game campaign for these purposes. Because even as the authors, it kind of felt, at least in the TV show, they hadn't quite found where to put him yet. Characters do develop over time, and while a single book, they can go back and fix things and develop them the way they want. In a series of books, sometimes that character that doesn't work in the first one, you find your way into on the next ones. And that may have been what happened. But in the show, it definitely reads like they are struggling to discover what happens with this character. And in TV pilots, that's really common. You often see alterations and changes to characters while they figure out what works for the player, or well, the actor and the character. Because sometimes good character, good actor just doesn't gel together. So they have to make adjustments. So don't feel like a failure if you've got a character that isn't quite working, particularly at the beginning. Amos wasn't really working at the beginning. I think I posted on Twitter, literally, he feels like the D&D hack and slash guy who came into like one of my more social campaigns. And he wasn't sure what to do. And by middle of season 2, I was really liking him. Season 3, he's my favorite character on the show. And I didn't think that would be possible. I was told he would be, and those people were correct, which is fantastic. But if you're having that problem, talk to people. Try to take the concept that you have, not altering the concept, but finding ways to make it fit in, to make it work, so that you have a place in that game where you feel like you are fulfilling the kind of role that you want to fulfill, without things getting necessarily always railroaded into you so you have those couple moments to shine. They can come a little more naturally if you find the way that the character fits in. So, one, see the Expanse because it's fantastic, but if you do, study Amos as an object lesson in how to make a character who is not working work. There are other examples, I'm sure. If you like it, go ahead. If you can think of other examples, put them in the comments. Also, share if you like it. Subscribe down below. I'm Michael Matthews. I hope you have some good games, and I will catch you later.